Now, you're going to think that you're going to want to skip Genesis 10 because it's one of those genealogies. But don't do that, because it's a really important chapter. And I'm not going to read everything about Genesis 10, but I'm going to show you why it's important. And Genesis 10 and Genesis 11, which deals with the Tower of Babel, are actually chronologically reversed. But I'll deal with them in the order in which Moses deals with them in the text, 10 and 11. But they're very important chapters. So these are the genealogies that come from Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's kids. These are the generations of the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons that were born to them after the flood. And I'm just going to highlight a couple things about it. First, the sons of Japheth. And he talks about these areas that later become known. And sometimes the names are known, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're areas, sometimes they're peoples. Gomer, Magog, those are Meshach. These are areas that the peoples that later on would recognize, Middle Eastern areas. We don't use those same names now. And then it talks about them. It talks when it uses names like Kittim or Dodanim. When there's an im on the end of it, those are plurals in Hebrew, and they're usually referring to people groups. Sometimes it gives you a geographical area. Coastland peoples, in verse 5, spread their lands, each with their own language, by their clans and their nations. It's obviously giving this broad spread of peoples. They're just sort of multiplying, and it's kind of like this ocean of peoples. It's not trying to give a really specific genealogy, but every once in a while it dips down. And when it does so on purpose. In verse 6, sons of Ham are Cush, Egypt. So Egypt is listed there. That's going to become important to the story later. And then Canaan. Canaan is the son of Ham, who becomes cursed. The Canaanites are living in the land. Also, you have Cush, verse 8, was the son of Nimrod. What a name, huh? He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. So why is it stopping on him? Well, we'll see. Verse 9. Therefore it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was, now here's interesting, Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and the land of Shinar. Well, that's going to become important for the next chapter, because Babel is going to be the area of the Tower of Babel, later Babylon, which is going to be the biblical stand-in or counterfeit to God's kingdom. God is going to have a center of his kingdom in Jerusalem and the New Jerusalem. Satan's going to counterfeit that with Babylon, and Babylon, the ultimate prostitute of the nations. And so here, all the way back in Genesis 10, you see the roots of that, which is why it stops at Nimrod. You see that the genealogy goes further. It talks about verse 11. He went into Assyria. He built Nineveh. That's going to become important later, much later on in the narrative, when we talk about the coming of the Assyrians. And so it talks about the Philistines in verse 14. I mean, these are people groups that are going to come onto the stage much later. Verse 15, the Canaanites. It talks about the Jebusites. They're the ones that David ultimately is going to take Jerusalem from around 1000 BC. The Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Archites. These are names that are going to become familiar later. These are just a sort of like, just think of it as a tidal ebb and flow of people groups that are being listed here as nations are starting to develop. Verse 21, to Shem also the father of the children of Eber, brother of Japheth, children were born. It keeps going through there. And like I said, I'm not going to read them all, but go down to verse 31. These are the sons of Shem. Shem is the father of the Semites. And the Semites will come Israel, the nation of the Jews. By their clans, their languages, their lands, their nations, these are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to the genealogies of their nations, and from them these are the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. We don't have Jews yet, we don't have Hebrews yet, because we don't have Abraham yet. Abraham is the father of the Hebrews, and he doesn't show up till chapter 12. But it's laying the background. It's not a very specific genealogy in that sense. So just look at it as a whole bunch of peoples are starting to populate the earth, and there's just a little bit of detail that is given. However, I want to introduce you to one particular passage, and we're going to use it later on. It's found in Deuteronomy 32, and it's in verse 8 and 9. And there it says, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Verse 9, but the Lord's portion is his people Jacob, his allotted heritage. Now, these are really important verses, and they haven't been without historic controversy, textually and interpretation. So let me just unpack it quickly, but it's important for what we're about to see in the Tower of Babel and the rest of the Bible. So when the Most High, that's God, gave the nations their inheritance. Well, what nations? Well, we just saw them, Genesis 10. The rising of the nations, God is going to give them inheritance. When he divided them, well, when did he divide them? Well, we haven't been told that story yet. That's why we need chapter 11, which is the Tower of Babel. It's kind of like a flashback. Here in chapter 10, we go, oh, nations, oh yeah, they're coming. But wait a second, this is important. So if this was a movie, we'd stop the movie, we'd get this flashback. And the flashback is going to be the building of this Tower of Babel. Something goes really wrong there. And God is going to divide the nations by their languages. And when he did that, and when he fixed their borders, he did so according to the number of the sons of God. Now, the sons of God are angels. God is going to put these nations under angels, and I would argue under demons. Why is he doing that? Why is he allowing angelic tinkering in these nations? Well, you got to figure out what happened at Babel. That's coming. At Babel, mankind's building a tower trying to be God. They're doing the same thing they did in the garden in Genesis 3. They're staging another rebellion. It's like God said, look, you want to stage a rebellion and storm heaven? All right, I'll put the angels over these nations. I'll let you know what it's like to be in spiritual battle under these nations. And Daniel will find that, by the way, when he sees that there's an angel that's trying to get to him with an answer to prayer, and yet he's held up by the Prince of Persia, and the Prince of Greece is coming. But I'm way ahead of myself. There's a real spiritual battle going on there. And so when God divides these nations, because of what's about to happen in chapter 11, he did so according to the number of sons of God. There's a textual problem there. Some manuscripts said he did so according to the number of the sons of Israel, but it makes no sense, because there was no Israel when he did that. I already said that, right? It takes Jewish people to get Israel, right? It takes Hebrews to get Israel, but there are no Hebrews in chapter 10. The Hebrews don't start before Abraham, and he doesn't show up till chapter 12 of Genesis. So scholars for a long time felt this is a problem in the text. In fact, the Greek version of this text said that he fixed the border according to the number of the sons of angels. And with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls around 1948, they found a Hebrew text. And what did the Hebrew text say? According to the number of the sons of God. Smoking gun. So there we go. It's like, wow, God actually did put these nations and allow these angels / demons to tinker in the affairs of nations. No wonder the place is so messed up. No wonder there's so many spiritual battles. No wonder Paul will later write that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against these principalities and powers and spiritual forces of evil. Oh, but there's one. The Lord's portion is Jacob, his allotted heritage. Yeah, we're about to get to that. That's chapter 12. And we're going to start to see this line of Jacob. We're going to see this line that comes from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. This is a foreshadowing of God's plan and what it's going to be. So I'm ahead of myself, but these rising of the nations in Genesis 10 is really important. Why is it important? Because of what happens in Genesis 11. There's a really big problem. You think the flood solved the problem. There's another problem. It's called the Tower of Babel. And just when you think everything's going to be fine, the world's going to be repopulated, there's going to be Earth 2.0. It's threatened by the Tower of Babel.